Live. Okay.
Okay. I feel like this is kind of hard because all we have to go off is pictures. But
I know.
Okay. So first question, we'll just dive in, is as you look at the pictures of Victorian fashion, what sorts of inferences can you draw about the society? So I had no idea. So I looked some stuff up, and I just looked up stuff about because a lot of the questions are about values and stuff and how fashion relates to them. So some of the things in this era, I guess I feel like higher morals kind of came into play. Like Queen Victoria and her husband, I guess had higher morals than the people that ruled before them. And so I guess sexual repression and a lower tolerance of crime and a strong social ethic were a few things that they I don't know, you wouldn't say enforced, but they believed in, I guess. And so I guess qualities in a woman, there's things that innocence, that they were virtuous, biddable, and ignorant of intellectual opinion. So I thought that was interesting. And then I guess a rich women back in that day, they would stay home and they would do things like read or sew or receive guests, doing that kind of stuff. But dress was really important. So the better they dressed, the more rich they seemed. So their husbands, especially if the husbands were wealthy, they would dress all of the women in their household in the finest things that they could, just to show off their wealth, I guess. So I guess things about the society, those are just kind of random things. I don't know how that stuff comes from the way they dressed, but that's what I found out. And yeah, actually that's it.
Yeah, I think that was really good. Those are the only things that I came up with as well, especially since we're just looking at pictures without any explanation, you know. And so I think we kind of talked about it that one time I feel like some of these questions we've already talked about, but was that for the Regency era? I don't know. But yeah, I think that you covered it pretty well. I don't know, did you have anything else, Susanna?
Yeah, I just by just looking at the slideshow, I think the way they dressed up is kind of simple. Of like the Victoria then what you call the before in the previous assignments, I think how the ladies are dressing up is quite simpler than we used to, and even with the men, there are slides that shows the pictures of the men. I think they dress up kind of simpler, and even how they do their hair is not as complicated as before. So I think there is changes in the fashion according to how they dress up and how they do their hair.
Yeah, I think there's definitely
no, I think it's all about simplicity.
Sorry. I think there's definitely changes, and the teacher did say that, but I think we're kind of supposed to figure out why they changed. Why did it get more simple? You know, I think is.
Sorry. One of the photos shows all the women working in that field. Did you guys see that one with the rake and all this stuff? And she's just laying in it. And I feel like maybe before, they wouldn't have done that because they're oh, my fair skin, da 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 da. I won't go out there and work. And then here's this photo of all these women just laying in their whatever they're raking up. I can't even tell, but they look maybe they dressed more simple because they were changing how they behave. They just worked more.
Yeah, I think Tana is right. That the in the Victorian era, the women are starting to work and more like job to earn some money and income for the family. So I'm sure that's part of why they are trying to dress up in simple ways, so that way they spend more time on trying to work instead of just dressing up all day. So
Okay, cool. So the next question is, what sort of meaning can we attach to the changes in women's sense of what shape their bodies should have, or the fact that their hairstyles were simplified?
Did you see the photo of the corset thing? Like what it does to their insides or whatever? I think that's what it was supposed to show. That was pretty gnarly. I don't so like that's what they're all going for, like to just completely contort their waist to like the tiniest things ever.
Yeah, I guess that just means that they just change their bodies into like what fits society's like norms, or I don't know. I don't think norm is the right word, but like, you know what I mean? Like the fashion, like whatever it is. I guess norm, but it's like to be as good as everyone else. I don't know what I'm trying to say. But you know, like you see people in the magazines and you want to be just like them, or like that's like the stereotype. They don't have magazines probably, but you know. And then the simpler hairstyles. I don't know. Does that mean? I mean, we kind of talked about this last time, and like when we were talking about how the switch to the Victorian era and how things were just like getting more like realistic, I guess. So it's like, why take hours and hours to do your hair? Like put on these crazy wigs. Like a lot of them are using their real hair and they just like curl it, or they just like have it down and they have like a hat on over it, stuff like that. So I just think that they're getting more realistic with, like they're putting their time maybe better into other things rather than their appearance only.
So like maybe I think ask like oh, maybe that's the next question. Whoops. Oh well, it says like what does it mean like that how women thought of themselves because of like how they were doing their hair and stuff. And maybe they were just like more accepting of like, this is how I am and I don't have to like go all out. And they're like more okay with how a human looks and didn't try to dress it up as much maybe.
Yeah, I think of that too, because I looked up the women's fashion, and it says in there, I mean the women's fashion during the Victorian era, and it says in there that the women were trying to help out their husbands and family businesses and stuff. So I'm thinking that's part of how they were doing their hair, that they first is that it's realistic for them, and one thing is that it's less time consuming, so they'll invent their time wisely instead of like what I shared in question 1.
Okay, cool. Okay, we'll go to the next question then. And it says, what does this have to do with the way women were thought of or thought about themselves? I think Tanner kind of covered part of it, where he just kind of said that like they were being like more accepting of their own bodies kind of thing, or their own appearance, I guess. And I guess other people were too, if they like everyone else was doing it.
So they were like more accepting of like their hair and stuff, but I still can't get over those corset things. Like, so they still weren't okay with like their body shape, but they were like, oh, my hair's fine. now it's all about like the skinniest waist possible that like almost kills me. And so, yeah, I don't know, because I keep saying like, or I keep thinking like, oh, it's more simple and they're like more okay and they want to be more practical. But then I'm like scrolling through these photos and their waists are like as big as my neck. And so I don't know, maybe it was just like a shift of interest. Maybe like this used to be cool, now this is cool.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's the shift of interest thing, because you know how like we have like the 70s dress and like we have the 80s dress, and there's like a huge difference in 90s and like 2000s or whatever, and that's all different. So I feel like this is kind of the same thing where like the romantic part, like era, whatever it was like the big hair, and then you move to the next like section and it's the Victorian era and they just have like the tiny waists. And then so I think maybe it's just kind of like one of those things where it's just the interest shift from big hair to small waists was like the thing that everyone like had to have.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's totally correct that, and just add on to that is, back in the Victorian era, how the women dress up is more like, it says a lot about the kind of lifestyle they are having. So up really says what kind of lifestyle they. So.
Okay, next question. What is the significance of the tight-waisted corset or the bustle?
I don't get it at all. It makes zero sense to me. Well, that's all, I guess. I just like it was a fad, and like the skinnier waist was like in, and just like with most fads, they just took it to an extreme, it looks like. And but yeah, I don't understand why anybody would want that. I don't know.
It's funny because I feel like that like skinny waist thing is almost like back in right now. Like if you look at like the Kardashians and stuff, it's like all about like the tiny waist and then like huge everything else. Yeah. And so it's like, I'm surprised that those things haven't come back. Like I'm waiting for the day that like someone starts to wear them again and use them. But I just think it's the same thing. Like it's just, that was the thing that was in then, like that was the interest, and that's what everyone wanted to look like. And so they used those things as tools to look how they wanted, rather than like nowadays we like have to do the workouts and all that kind of stuff and like eat right. And then I'm sure they had to do some of that too, but mostly they just used those things and tightened them so that they looked how they looked.
Totally right. And like what Tanner shared in slide number 10, it shows waist thingy looks like, and I think it's one reason is that people didn't want to waste more time on, like what Alex said, exercising and trying to get that slim waist. So they'll just use that as just to get that look that they want, and then just move on and do what they need to do. So.
Cool. Okay, so the next one is, why did men become even simpler in their dress?
Is oh, you go, Susanna.
No, I really didn't get reason why the men dress up simpler, but I think just like what I mentioned earlier, the reason, one of the reason can be is that they want to on their job and what they are doing instead of getting all those complicated outfits wearing. And yeah.
Is this still the era where it's cool to be middle class?
As far as I read, it was, but then I think as time went on, the classes started to like separate more. So I think it was the romantic era where it was like cool to be middle class and like the beginning of Victorian. And I think by the end, it started to like separate a lot. Like you could tell, like the rich ones were like rich and they like showed it off type thing, and then the poor ones were poor. But I don't really remember reading anything about the middle class. Like it was just kind of like rich showed off and the poor like struggled with food. So I don't know, but maybe we'll go with that.
Yeah, I don't remember either exactly. I remember reading somewhere where it was like middle class is like the shiz and like rising, and so maybe it was just like if that was the case, it could have just been like a push to be even like more middle class and more simple, and then just like yeah, I don't know, more practical, more working, kind of like what the exact things we talked about before already, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about that because I'll have to go back and look before I like finish the paper and stuff about the middle class thing, because I think that is, and that would make a lot of sense as to why people try to kind of like dress down and like rather than trying to show that they were like super high class, they kind of just like dress simple, normal, and then everyone went about their lives. But yeah. Okay, so next question. Why is there so much less variation for men than for women?
I think that's just how it's been for like ever. Well, except for like in that one, there was that one era where like everybody was frilly and like even the dudes were all like frilly and everywhere and super fancy. But I just think from then on, like it just became like men have like their style, like their, I don't know, what even are they wearing? Like their suit. Yeah. Like their suit and tie. And then women have like all these different variations of dresses. Just kind of like how it is now, I feel like.
Some stuff that I read was like, well, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but about how like the men like to dress their women, like all the women in their household, like the greatest dressing. But I don't really know why that is. Like, why wouldn't they want to dress themselves and that kind of thing? So maybe it was kind of a push for like men work and like men are the like head of the household kind of thing, and then they have their women who they like to like show off. And like it said how women were like the ones who entertained the guest and like had guests over and like did all the like, I don't know, the household stuff. But I don't know, maybe it was just a way like, also it talked stuff about like men using, what was it? It was like I'm not on that page anymore. But just about like how they treated women. Like I think that's when they started like using women for other things. And so I don't know if that has anything to do with like kind of making women look more as like items, because it also talked about how they wanted them to not be like intellectually like politically smart. Like they didn't want to know about that stuff. They wanted them to be like kind of incompetent when it came to that kind of stuff. So maybe they were just using women as like items, and they wanted them to dress the best because that was like their item that they wanted to show off. Like women were kind of property.
Yes, that made me remember something about the poem, and like how one of the questions was like, who's allowed to look at beauty? And maybe it was like, because like how that one poem was like, oh, men like can look at the beauty, and so that's why they're like all dressed up, like you were kind of saying, like items more. But since women aren't really like supposed to look at beauty, like that one poem was talking about, then that's like whatever, we can dress however we want and super simple, maybe.
Yeah, I think you guys had covered shared for that question.
Sorry, I was just writing stuff down. Okay, so next. How do these things relate to such issues as relationships between men and women, or the fact that middle class had become clearly the class of power in England?
So like maybe the relationship is kind of how we're talking about, like women were to be like looked upon and all fancy, and like women weren't really the ones looking at beauty, like they were the beauty, and so all the men were just like looking at them. So that's kind of like how their relationship was. Like I look at you, don't look at me. Like that one dude, like, oh, she has a pretty face. But yeah, what was the other part of the question? So like,
How do these things relate to such issues as relationships between men and women, or the fact that middle class had clearly become the class of power in England?
so then, yeah, maybe like the simpler dress in men, just kind of like showing that the middle class is the class to be, like, and so dress like middle class because that's cool.
Yeah, I think that's right. That men and women became more simpler in the way they dress up, and that way the middle class earn more income when they try to spend more time in working. In other words, they are using their days wisely in trying to money. So I would just say that Victorian fashion brought so much similarity in the responsibility between a man and a woman. They both want to work and earn some money for the family. So that's just my thought.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let's see. Yeah, so I think for that, I'll like mostly talk about. I like what Tanner said about how the women weren't looking at beauty; they were the beauty. I'll probably use that line, so thank you for that. And yeah, I think that's good on that. And then the thing about middle class being the power, I think it just kind of shows that like everyone was kind of looking towards middle class. Like when you look at the pictures and stuff, I think most of them were the middle class pictures. And there was even this one about them working. So yeah, I don't know, it just kind of shows that they did have power. So I'll talk about that too. And that was the last question. So do you guys have anything else you want to add before we finish?
I don't think so. You feel like you have sufficient for your needs?
Yeah, I think I'm good.
Okay. So I think we're good then. Did you have anything else, Susanna?
Nope.
Okay, awesome. I'll go ahead and